Hey, good day, everybody. This is E. Myself too, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Inquirer Show. Glad that you're joining us today on January 28th, 2021. On today's broadcast, we're going to bring up the technical state of Georgia athletics. We'll delve into college athletics in the state of Georgia. We'll then transition into the backdoor cut. I have some NBA thoughts about what's going on in professional basketball. And we'll wrap up the miscellaneous department with the Houston Texans making a new hire, my thoughts on the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame vote, Chelsea firing its club legend, and anything else that comes up in the world of sports as we're broadcasting. As always, if you want to follow everything that we're doing, head to thesportsinquirer.net. You can also go to our social media platforms, starting with Twitter and Instagram under Sports Inquirer. That's all one word. You can also go to our Facebook pages. We have two of them. We have the Sports Inquirer and Sports Inquirer. They're separate ones, but they provide some good content for you. And then finally, subscribe to us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Podcast, and iTunes under the Sports Inquirer. It's interesting because I was putting together the outline for today's show, and with the Super Bowl about a week and a half away as you're listening to this show, don't not get too much into the X's and O's of that contest yet, because we have plenty of time next week. We could break down the offensive line versus defensive line, the Mahomes and Tom Brady debates, and Andy Reid and what his legacy is, and Bruce Arians and all that fun stuff. So we're not touching too much on that yet, and really no news has developed on that front from the Super Bowl game. Yeah, there really hasn't been any special news of anything going on. No injuries yet, no suspensions or major factors yet with it. It is interesting, and I will admit, I mean, you're listening to the show, and so I'm assuming that you are a sports fan or supporter of some sort. But yeah, Super Bowl weeks are always weird, especially that week before the Super Bowl, where you get over analysis of the game, and it's understandable. And I always feel awkward or weird to criticize sports media when I'm in the sports media myself. But you have all of these from Fox News, Fox Sports, and ESPN, and NBC Sports Network, and all these other 24/7 deals where you have to fill the time, you have to fill the content. And look, as great as the Lakers and Sixers game was last night, and we're going to break that down later on in the show, football is still king, but there's no football to really talk about as far as actual activities taking place. So that's where you're getting a lot of breaks. Now, the good part for the NFL, and this is what makes the NFL king of the sports media, is I'm watching right now Deshaun Watson. Well, is he going to stay with Houston Texans? You have Aaron Rodgers, that drama going on there. David Culley was just hired by the Houston Texans. We'll get to that later on in the show. But that just fills the cycle of sports news and what it means. And there's nothing more exciting. Two things get fan bases, even especially if you're neutral or you don't support a team. The two things get you excited. One is discussing the draft, and two are when a quarterback changes positions or it's a major free agent in a position. But usually quarterback is that marquee guy. And we've had from Deshaun Watson to Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford. We've had the retirement of Philip Rivers. I think the impending retirement of Drew Brees. So now you have open quarterback spots and open positions and guys that don't seem too happy. Also, Jared Goff and the the lack of support from Snead, the general manager, saying that he's a Ram for now, even though he did his 4 year, $100+ million contract with the Rams just kicked in, and now the general manager is saying he's a Ram for now. Not giving the best vote of confidence for their starting quarterback. So that adds some excitement and intrigue and a lot of discussions and topics. But it's all speculation. But that really, outside of that, it's a kind of a slow period. And unfortunately, that starts me off as far as slow periods with Georgia State men's basketball. They are coming off of a loss for, let's get to that contest first. They lost their last contest last Saturday afternoon, 74-61 at Appalachian State. Really struggled from the field, just shooting 13 to 43. Before they made their 8 of their first 9 shots, but then shot only 30% the rest of the way. Now, Corey Allen did have 19 points for the team, for a team high. Justin Roberts had 18, and Jalen Thomas scored 10. Uh, Sasime Leo had a team high 12 rebounds, but just a constant struggle of shooting the ball really limited Georgia State's opportunities of success. We were able to catch up with head coach Rob Lanier after the contest about the loss and other content from that defeat. Here it is.
I'm gonna let you know this was a disappointing weekend to say the least. Um, a lot of credit goes to App State. They're a good team. They're well coached. They played very executed, defended us very well, and they were the tougher team. There's no doubt about that. And no excuse for the kind of effort and the lack of toughness we had on display. That's really what it all came down to. They were just a better team. And this weekend was a great learning experience for us about where we are right here, right now. And we got a long way to go. Obviously, there's a lot of basketball to be played. And this is a great lesson for us. And so we're gonna take advantage of that lesson, and we're gonna learn and grow going forward. I think a lot of the credit has to go to App State. I mean, they had a lot of answers. They shot the ball well, made a lot of threes, and it came down to our inability to play through adversity. Obviously, it's the first weekend since the opening game where we had the full complement of available players on the court together. So that's not an excuse for the intangible, the energy, the lack of toughness that we had on display against a good opponent. And I think there's a lack of maturity in our team that I think we think we're better than we are. And I think we learned today that we've got a long way to go. And I've got a clear mind about it. I think we're going to get better. And I think App State helped us in a lot of ways by showing us what a good team looks like, what toughness looks like. I think we have it in our group, but what we found out this weekend is that we got a long way to go. Well, I think when you struggle shooting the ball, you have to rely on the other things even more. Defending, rebounding, toughness, execution, discipline. So I don't think missing shots is an excuse for the way that we played. And I think our guys know that.
All right, and that was Rob Lanier, head coach of Georgia State men's basketball. And their problem now is that they are not going to play this weekend. They were scheduled to play some contest, I believe. Let's see, make sure I have that accurate. Don't want to give correct information. Yeah, they're going to play two home games this weekend, the 29th and the 30th, against South Alabama. But unfortunately, there have been some confirmed positive tests, I guess, within the team and the staff. And what that means is when you have for COVID, if you have a positive test, you shut all team activities down. And that's exactly what we're having happen. There's not the first time this happened this season for them. We've seen it with Georgia Tech as well, with both teams, men and women, and the Georgia State women's team. I don't think there's one team, and obviously Kennesaw State as well. We do some work with Kennesaw State, and they've had games canceled due to positive tests. And not only the positive test from your own program, but if your opponent has positive tests, they'll shut it down. But it's just an unfortunate thing as well, and that's kind of why the sports season is a little slower right now too, because of a lot of postponements of everything that is going on. But yeah, you just have to see what you can do there in that regard. That's what I saw from. So with Georgia State, I think that's the offensive struggles, have been an issue for the team a decent amount of the year. It really just showed its presence in a major way in that App State loss. And they have good shooters. I mean, Allen's a very good shooter. Justin Roberts, Kane Williams can get to the basket just as well as almost any guy in the entire conference. So they can score points. They're just not putting together those numbers. So we'll see what happens when the team gets back on the court. Let's transition to the backdoor cut and discuss some NBA action. I watched a good amount of the Atlanta and Brooklyn contest last night. The Nets were able to emerge with an overtime victory. The thing about Brooklyn is, with their now all three of their major guys are in the lineup. Kyrie is back from his sabbatical. I'll put it kindly, but he's back on the court. James Harden has now been with the Nets about a week and a half now, 2 weeks, we'll say. Kevin Durant. So all three of those guys are on the court, and I thought it was a really good litmus test for Brooklyn and Atlanta as well to see where those programs are. We'll start with the Atlanta side of things, and what I like from Atlanta has been the emergence of their younger guys. We've seen, especially DeAndre Hunter. I think we're seeing a lot more offense from him than expected. And I think that's been a very good thing. Where we knew he was a solid defender, especially on the perimeter for his size, but we're starting to see him put together 15 to 20 points in a contest. I think it's been very good. Kevin Huerter, I was very surprised by him. I thought did a very good job. Now he's really served. I know we have Brandon Godwin as well, as far as the backup point guard for Trey Young, but we're starting to uh, see Kevin handle the ball a lot more. And I thought he did a solid job there in that regard. And obviously, he's a very good outside shooter, so he was doing some good things there. Clint Capella, I think, has been a much needed presence inside to supplement John Collins as far as some interior players that the Hawks can use, in their deal. I think that with Trey Young also, I like that he's been aggressive offensively. He went through a little bit of a low. I wouldn't call it necessarily a lull, but you saw him and we're saying all this, they only played 18 to 20 games this year as far as all these teams. But you saw maybe at like that 10, 11 game mark, he was not being aggressive offensively as he should be. But we're starting to see that a lot more. He had a double double, 28 points and 14 rebounds. Cam Reddish, 24 points off of the bench. He's been another guy that's really shown you some things as far as a young guy giving some good activity. And I thought once the game got to overtime, that was gonna be really tough for Atlanta to win the contest. But really, and I think Atlanta, I said in the preseason they should be a playoff team. I do still believe that, and we'll go over the rest of the standings when I finish my recap of Brooklyn and Atlanta as well as Philadelphia and the Lakers. But I think you're starting to see that right now. The 6 to 8 seed is very attainable for them. And I did tweet out a few weeks ago. Before they went on a little bit of a losing streak. Why not be a top 4 or 5? And then they started to lose a bunch of games. So I don't know if they're gonna necessarily be that high. But what I saw last night is that it is a playoff team, and defensively, they're still not where you want to see them overall. And overtime does push the numbers up a little bit because that game was in the 90s until the last 3 4 minutes of the fourth quarter and then into overtime. But I think they're making a better effort and they've improved in that regard. So I think that bodes well for them. Brooklyn's an odd team though, because you have three of maybe the five best offensive players in all of the NBA. Obviously, Harden and Durant. You can argue maybe the two best pure offensive players in the entire league, just as far as scoring points. And when you throw in Harden being able to distribute the ball as well, those two guys are elite. Kyrie Irving is also an elite talent as well. He's an all-star caliber player, maybe the best ball handler in the entire NBA. So you put all three of those guys on the same team at the same time, you're like, man, this is a really good situation. But they're still trying to figure out who's the main guy. Now Durant, obviously, see the crazy thing about Durant, I thought he had a quiet game, which was going through the motions and had some really just I don't say passive, but just going through his basic business. Had 32 points in the contest. and that was a team high or the game high in the victory. He's going to get his points no matter what. I thought they really should have gone to him even more than they did because he was a big mismatch for the Hawks as who was going to defend him. I think you saw Collins and you saw obviously Hunter. Some of them try to defend him, but I thought that Durant was the big offensive advantage for Brooklyn in this contest. Some days it may be Kyrie, some days it may be Harden, but I thought Durant was the main guy. But they didn't go to him enough, and really in the fourth quarter, you start seeing him assert himself more. Had a few dunks in the lane, had a few short shots to really keep Brooklyn within distance of tying the contest to take it in overtime. But he had 32 points. But what you're seeing is Harden is the main ball handler for the team. And that's expected because we've seen all the work he's done in Houston over the years. He is a primary ball handler and he distributes the ball well. 31 points, a game high 15 assists, had 8 rebounds as well. He was played very well in the contest and he missed a few bunnies as well in the lane and some short shots. So he could have been in close to 40 if his shot was really going. But so you see those two guys, they kind of work out well together. But then Kyrie, he's just you don't see him really in the flow of things consistently. I think you saw one time when Kyrie was on the floor by himself without Durant and Harden, and he started to assert himself offensively. And I give credit to Dominique Wilkins. I think it was him or Stinger who were doing the broadcast and saying that Kyrie has been pretty quiet through the first 3 quarters. What are we going to see in the fourth quarter? And sure enough, you saw Kyrie get more aggressive, shoot more shots. Those guys are great, great players and broadcasters. They know the game better than any of us will know. So they knew that at a certain point, I guess they felt the vibe that Kyrie was going to get some shots off, and sure enough, he did. And now, him and Durant really led the charge for the Nets to get the game to tie it. But defensively, I didn't like what I saw from the contest. The Hawks were able to get anything they wanted to. And John Collins, he had 21 points and 8 rebounds. He was able to post up a lot in the contest. You saw Trey Young was able to drive the ball, distribute it. Harden and Kyrie were not offering much defensive, pressure from Trey doing whatever he wanted to do, and you saw a lot of post ups with Hunter on guys like Joe Harris and even a Jeff Green, guys who that hunt that I mean Hunter and Collins, they're bigger than, and they're able to go inside. And DeAndre Jordan's had his better years are behind him. You saw Jeff Green play 30 plus minutes in the contest, meaning that they trusted a smaller lineup against Atlanta, even with the presence of Hunter Capella and Collins. And they decided to use a smaller lineup. That's not a good sign for the Nets when they're going to face Philadelphia in the playoffs and will have to deal with a Joel Embiid. Or if they do make it to, or even like when they face Milwaukee, have to deal with Giannis and the Lopez brothers and the size they provide. And then if they make it to the championships, which is probably NBA championship, which probably be the finals, would probably be against a team like the Lakers. You gotta deal with LeBron and Anthony Davis inside. Denver, you gotta deal with Jokic. Even Utah, and don't laugh at Utah making the finals. They're 14-4 right now, best record in the West. They gotta deal with Rudy Gobert. That'll be a big issue for the Nets defensively, especially on the interior. Now their scoring is awesome. I mean, they could average 130 to 40 points per contest. The problem is they're going to give up 120, and you're not going to be able to get to that 140 every single night. So I think that if they need some interior help, and the easiest thing to find, especially when you get past the All Star break, and then the buyout market is some bigs, and I think they'll have some open roster spots that they can bring in some big players. But you look at the trades that they made, losing a Levert and respect Levert, they that trade may have saved his life to Indiana. They did the physical, found a mass in his kidney. He's going to surgery, recovering from that. So prayers to him that he survives that. But he was a major contributor for the team, especially off the bench, and gave him a lot of firepower. Losing Jared Allen, Jared Allen for the post player, trading him away with the move for Harden. He really was the better center for the Nets than DeAndre Jordan, but they decided to keep Jordan. I know he's boys with Durant and Kyrie, and he's a veteran. You gotta give him that. But I thought that Allen's gonna be a solid contributor for many years in the NBA as a center, and he really been a good part for Brooklyn. But I think Brooklyn is there. You're looking at them; they're right kind of where they are, right now as far as the standings go. They're 12-8. Only teams with a better record right now are Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Indiana. I think they could leapfrog Indiana and maybe get to that 2 to 3 seed. I think your top four teams in the East are pretty set. You could give me Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, and Boston, and you want to rotate between those four. I think that's what you're going to see. And once you get to the playoffs, though, I mean, home court advantage, and that's another thing I noticed from the game. It was in Atlanta, and just the lack of energy from the game. And the reason is, and it's not just a knock on Atlanta fans. We're not going there, but the lack of fans in the arena really hurts what's going on. And I think that's a major issue as far as these teams trying to put themselves in position to have home court advantage. And then we're talking about that when we get to the playoffs. I think it's honestly not going to matter who the home team is or the away team is. Now, obviously, it's better you want to be home because you get to sleep in your own bed, especially during the deal with the pandemic. Comfort is a major thing, but right now, I just don't see that home court advantage being a big deal. All right, we wanted to talk about as well the Philadelphia and Los Angeles Lakers contest yesterday. The Sixers were able to win the contest 107 to 106. And I thought it was a really good contest. Lakers' first road loss of the season. They were 10-0, I believe, on the road prior to last night. The usual suspects did really well. Ben Simmons, we'll start the Philadelphia side. Ben Simmons, triple double, 17 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists. Joel Embiid, 28 points, 6 rebounds. I think, and I like their starting lineup with you have Simmons and Curry in the backcourt, Embiid, Green, and Harris as far as your front court. The shooting, I think that is good that you got Curry and Green and Tobias Harris, some good outside shooters. And I know Green hasn't had the best start to the season as far as outside shooting, but he's a pro. You've seen him shoot very well in the past, but I think that spreads the court out a little bit more, and that's where you see Embiid able to go inside. And with Embiid, look, he's going to shoot his 2 or 3 long shots per game that you're just going to shake your head at and like, what are you doing? But I think that starting lineup is a good. Their bench leaves a little bit to be desired, but I think that Philadelphia, that was a good win for them. And I think with the Lakers, obviously their lineups were very good. James 34 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists. Anthony Davis 23 points, 8 rebounds. You look at the Gasol, 8 points, 3 assists, nice backdoor passes to LeBron James for dunks in the first half. I saw those when I was watching the game closely. I saw that going on. But I think that with the Lakers, you worry about their outside shooting. I think defensively they'll be okay. But you look at Caldwell Pope, Schroeder, those guys, even James, they're inconsistent outside shooters. Now I know James is actually shooting probably one of his better starts to a season, shooting the ball, but I think that's an area of concern, for the team. And when I say area of concern, I mean we're really nitpicking as far as that goes. But I think it was so just a good win for Philadelphia. Obviously, you get the defending champs on your home court. You want to win that contest. And Philadelphia right now, under first-year head coach Doc Rivers for them, 13-6, best record in the Eastern Conference. I think that they are putting themselves in a prime position to be a contender for a championship. As I like more what they're doing offensively and defensively, I thought that Brown, their previous head coach, he did a very good job through the process, if you do quote unquote process, rebuilding that team from its depths or its lows and building it up to a playoff team. But you need that next step. Now, Doc Rivers, we saw the Clippers. he couldn't even get them in the NBA Finals, let alone win one. And he had a lot of talent over his time with the Clippers, and even last year we saw their implosion in the bubble. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. But he's with Philadelphia now, new team, new energy, and I think he's taking it. You've seen Embiid; he's come in good shape. He's playing, I think, the best. This is the best stretch we've seen him play in his career. When he took that hard foul with the that LeBron James got called for a flagrant on with a little shove, and I think he did shove him a little bit, and I understand that. And this is where and Embiid did say after the game, if I did that, I would have been called for a flagrant and kicked out of the game and all this other stuff. I think you react more, or the calls are made more with the result of the play than the actual uh, what the play was itself. Like if that play happened and Embiid hopped back up and act like nothing happened and just got right to the free throw line taking shots, I don't think it's called a flagrant or anything like that. But he did fall down hard right on his back, and we know he's had major back issues in his career. He's had issues with his entire body, but the back, was something that really hurt him when he first came into the NBA. So he took a hard hit right on that back, all that weight and size on that lower back. You're very concerned. So I think they saw that fall and it made a big thud, and he was down on the ground for a few minutes. That led to, I think, the severity of the foul call when it may have not necessarily been that far. But for Embiid to be back on the get, he was able to. He took the hit, stayed in the game. That was a good sign for the Sixers. So as I said, the Sixers right now 13-6, best record in the Eastern Conference. Milwaukee, Indiana, and Brooklyn in the top four. The rest of the playoff bracket: Brooklyn, I'm in Boston, Cleveland, Atlanta, New York. I think that's possibly going to be the playoffs right there. Now, Toronto, you would think that maybe they can get some wins going and they can maybe find themselves into the postseason. They've gone off to a slow start under 500 so far this year, but they've been a proven program or team over the past few years. I think they're going to put themselves together and find a way into the playoffs. I mean, Thibodeau has the Knicks playing hard, though. You see what they can do with Randall and RJ Barrett. They are playing very, very hard. And I mean, they're 8-11, so it's not like they're doing awesome, but they're in the eighth seed right now, tied with Orlando, and that's for the Knicks. And trust me, growing up in New York and following the Knicks all these years, and their 20 years of ineptitude that they've had since their finals appearance back in 1999, this is a good start for the Knicks just to be in the postseason picture. Now I know it's still early, but still, they're at least they're around. And they'll go to the Western Conference. So the Lakers are 14-5 right now, and they're actually technically in second place because Utah is 14-4. The Utah's had a really good start to the year. We usual suspects there: Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Conley at point. Just a very good team is Utah. Clippers and Denver round out the top four. As I said, we've seen all these teams play really well in the past, so that's not a surprise. Portland's 9-7. San Antonio's 10-8. That's a little bit of a surprise for me because they've had just the past few years by San Antonio standards. And I mean, they went through a 25-year period. The Spurs actually beat the Knicks in that '99 final, and since they won that, they've been the most consistent franchise in the entire NBA with multiple five championships. So I got my numbers correct. Just a tremendous run for them and Popovich. But they've had some down years, but to see them in the playoff picture is interesting. Memphis is 7-6. Obviously, Ja Morant had a stint on the injury uh, list, but he's back and playing, well for the squad. Golden State's 10-8, and they're in the top eight of the playoffs for in standings for the West. Obviously, the injury to Klay Thompson was really, really bad for them. But you're seeing Curry work his way through it, and Wiseman. I know he's coming off the bench a little bit more now, the rookie, than he did in the beginning of the year. But I think that he's going to be a solid contributor. Kelly Oubre has been big for them. Obviously, Draymond Green's been playing a consistent level for that squad. I think they're going to find their way into the playoffs when I probably did not have them listed in that spot at the beginning of the year. So those are my thoughts on the NBA and the gridiron. Oh no, not the gridiron blitz. The backdoor cut portion of our show. And let's head straight to the miscellaneous department and some musings in the world of sports. Houston Texans have made the final hire of the NFL coaching carousel for this year, at least we think, with David Culley. He's their new head coach. He was a Ravens assistant over the past few years. He's been 65 years old, first time being a head coach in the NFL. He's coached for a lot of franchises. This past year, was an assistant with the Ravens and their passing game coordinator. Their passing game has not been coordinated very well for the Ravens, but still been there around with Lamar Jackson and helping to develop him. That's not the worst thing. Obviously, we were looking at this as a potential landing spot for Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that when they did not interview him initially in the start of the coaching cycle, and we saw every other opening from the Jets to the Falcons, the Jaguars. They all interviewed Bieniemy for the head coaching spot, except for the Houston Texans, and that has really sparked the tensions between the star quarterback Deshaun Watson and him maybe wanting to leave Houston and everything with that. I think, and they approach after some hires were made, and the stories about Deshaun Watson recommending Bieniemy be a candidate, and them not doing it initially, them coming back around to Bieniemy to interview him. I think they probably did it, and I think they maybe even offered Bieniemy the position or gone through the steps towards it. But I think Bieniemy kind of held back on it. First of all, maybe just on GP, general principle, you didn't want to hire me in the beginning. Now you're now you're interested in me now after all this other stuff is going on. So that might have been one. And then two, I think he realizes Watson is not long for the Houston Texans. And whether it's a trade to that we've heard the Jets, maybe the Colts work something out because they have they got a head coaching, I got a quarterback position open now with Phillip Rivers retiring. There's a lot of opportunity. I think there'd be maybe outside of Kansas City, Green Bay. And by the way, Aaron Rodgers is not going anywhere. Well, you never say never because it's professional sports, but you look at the money he's going to make. They're going to renegotiate some stuff and sweeten his pot and give him some more money than what he's slated to make because he's not even in the top maybe 5 or 10 as far as salary goes in the NFL. Now his cap hit is high, but the actual money he's going to get is not very high. And so they'll negotiate some stuff. But where is Rodgers going to go where he can one be compensated in a high way and be in championship contention? I think that Green Bay is the only answer in that regard. And furthermore, Green Bay has his contracts for 2 more years. Everyone's bringing up Tom Brady, and look what he did. Tom Brady was a free agent. He could sign with any team in the NFL, and that's when the Bucks signed him, made some moves, and were able to get their team to be NFC champions. The Aaron Rodgers does not have that same situation. Now this is Deshaun Watson. Both of these guys have to be traded. So the team has control. Now, if you really want to play hardball and they want to trade you to a team you really don't want to go to, you can say I'm not going to report and all of that stuff. I mean that can happen, but the team still has control though over your contract and where you're going to go. So I think with Watson, there'll be some options for him. Just like if Aaron Rodgers is really in the open market, there'll be options for him as well, or even in the trade market. But I think that Watson, though, may be towards the end of the run for him in Houston. And I think that's why you get a guy like David Culley, who, no disrespect to him, is probably on the low end of the head coaching options that we've seen with other places. We've seen with Urban Meyer, college football champion, high pedigree, going to the Jaguars in that market. We've seen Salah going strong general manager, a strong assistant coach, especially with the 49ers over the past few years, going to the Jets. We have Arthur Smith, the OC from the Tennessee Titans, going to Atlanta. Dan Campbell with Detroit, it's a little bit of a funky hire, in my opinion, but still a guy who's been around, I think, higher regarded than Culley is. So I think this is not the best hire for Houston, but I think it's one of those hires it's the NFL. So even if you're in the worst position ever, even with without Deshaun Watson and a roster that may be bottom five in the NFL with his departure when Watson, it's still an NFL job. So you still have guys who are going to take it, but you probably have to stick with a guy like Culley or get a guy like Culley when you don't have too many options. No one was voted into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. I used to really get into this stuff when I was younger and debating who should be in the Hall of Fame. And I've had remember debates of the Tony Perez, should he be a Hall of Famer? Should this guy be a Hall of Famer? And that, and Dave Concepcion and all that other stuff, and all these other. There'd be some big, heated debates. And you still have some of those right now, but I think what baseball has done with the way things are going right now. I'm 39 years old. I started following baseball really consistently in 1988 with the Mets. Lost in the NLCS to the Dodgers, still not over it. Best team they've probably had history of that team, even better than '86. Look at the numbers, just as good, maybe even better. But anyway, so you look at all the guys that I came up with or followed. Now, no, that are Hall of Famers. The Ken Griffey Juniors, Frank Thomases, Pedro Martinez, Randy Johnson, all those guys, Chipper Jones, guys like that, and then all the Yankees. I grew up in New York when these guys were at their peaks. Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, guys that are Hall of Famers, all timers. We get it. They're got a lot of they're MVPs, Cy Young winners, and then Maddox and Randy Johnson and Glavine, Smoltz, like all these guys I came up with in the '90s, even into the 2000s, that I followed the sport and acknowledged were Hall of Famers. But you also have a group of guys that I started following that put up big numbers. Bonds, Sosa, Roger Clemens, guys. Well, not let's get Sosa out of it, but the two biggies, Bonds and Clemens, arguably the best pitcher and best player I saw in my era. I say arguably. Now with Clemens, I prefer Pedro and Randy Johnson and Maddox, those three over Clemens, but Clemens is in the conversation. Bonds would be, I say outside, and I thought Griffey was better because Griffey was probably the best outfielder I've seen in my era. And there's some other guys who are technically still playing. I know that, like Pujols, so I don't consider him in that because he's still playing technically. But as far as guys that are retired, but Bonds is probably maybe one of the top 3 or 4 baseball talents I've ever seen personally, visually in my era. Now I don't go back to Aaron and Mays and those type of guys and Mantle and DiMaggio. Obviously, those guys were retired before I was even born, honestly. But you have these names of guys that I saw in their primes playing while I followed and I was like, while I followed the sport. And I'm like, okay, those guys are Hall of Famers. Those guys are tremendous players. And now they're not Hall of Famers. What's going on? And my thing is with the steroids issue, and I think this is where people are really confused. What's the cutoff? What's the deal with? I think these writers and a lot of fans are making very convenient that steroids just started in 1998 or 99. Oh, when McGuire and Sosa really came into our periphery, and that's when it started. And then steroids have stopped around 2010. I guess when you really had technically more testing for it. I say bull crap to that. Steroids have been around in sports since the 50s. You can look it up. If you follow the Olympics like I have, European countries, even the United States, steroids have been around since the 50s and 60s. I've always said with baseball, they talk about the greenies, the amphetamines, and they treat those like, oh, guys used to take greenies back in the day. That is a performance enhancing drug. It's not the andro or the with you're not you're not injecting yourself with it or taking the clear, the cream, and all of that stuff. But if you're taking an amphetamine, which is now banned, by the way, in the 60s and 70s, you were using a performance enhancer. Now, I'm not saying we should kick out every major leaguer or Hall of Famer from the 60s and 70s. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying if you look at the landscape of the sport, now ethically and morally, look, that's a whole nother debate. But if it was not illegal at the time that you were playing in the league, I don't see what the problem is with it now, being revisionist about it. And another thing I don't like, okay, Bonds, yes, we've seen even Clemens, all of the speculation and rumors, and they were associated with guys who took the drug, and even have Jose Canseco. He's made his statements all the time about I injected this guy and that guy and all these allegations. Not one failed test. If you're talking about a Rafael Palmeiro or Alex Rodriguez, who's going to be a Hall of Fame candidate next year, those guys actually failed test. That I can kind of work with. If you want to go that route, I can get that a little bit more. But you even had guys like Jeff Bagwell and Mike Piazza never even failed a test. But there were rumors or whispers that they were taking drugs. Ivan Rodriguez, and they're like, "Oh, he should not be in the Hall of Fame because he's a drug. He used steroids." I didn't see a failed test. I haven't heard speculation. I'm not going to go on the word of some former player or maybe some media member hearing whispers. That's not the right way to approach it. And are there guys took who took steroids and passed the test? Some Hall of Famers that were able to pass tests in whatever way they needed to do it. Of course there is. I'm not naive to that as well. But to use this deal with they played in this era, so I'm not going to vote anyone in. Just don't vote then. And you're really turning off a good amount of your fan base of people who follow the game and like the game when you have all of these name guys who are not even in the Hall of Fame. And furthermore, and those will be my last 2 points, and then we'll move on. When you have a guy like Curt Schilling, who is a Hall of Famer in my opinion, but you're having people don't not want to vote for him because of his political beliefs. Trust me, I am not a supporter of his beliefs at all. We're not a political show, but you can do a nice little internet search of Schilling and his political beliefs and his theories. They are very, very, very counter to what I believe. But the man was a Hall of Fame caliber pitcher. We saw him win close 200 games. We saw him have very successful runs with several franchises from Philadelphia to obviously Boston. We know all about him helping the team win their first World Series in 100 plus years. Arizona, he won a championship there as well. I thought he was a Hall of Fame pitcher. Now, I mean, you can argue if he is or isn't as far as his on the field stuff, and that's fair. I'm not mad. If you don't think he's a Hall of Famer because of he's not befitting a standard of a pitcher at Hall of Fame, okay, I get all of that because that's talking about on the field stuff, and I'm cool with that. But if you're going to make that argument for him not being a Hall of Famer because of his political beliefs or his theories, and trust me, they are cringeworthy, a lot of them. It's not a hall of morality. It's a hall of fame about what you do on the field. So you have to acknowledge that and realize what's going on. So that's where you have to separate yourself on that. So that's where you see a turn off on there. And then this is my last point on it. You have 1 second. All right, well, now we're back. I had a little bit of delay there. Oh, but on my last point on it, you have guys who, and yes, has it become a hall of very good? I'll give you that. Some guys who have gotten in, I think that maybe or had good careers. And the Harold Baines of the world getting into the Hall of Fame, you look at it as like, I don't. He had a good career, but he's a Hall of Famer, probably not. But I look at some guys like Andrew Jones, and maybe because we're based in Atlanta, and We know a lot of Atlanta Brave fans and supporters. You hear the numbers and you realize it. And I said he was right in my era of watching games. And I still watch games, of course. But I think 10-time Gold Glove winner, close to 400 runs. We're going to pull up Andrew Jones. Matter of fact, Andrew Jones right now. And while we pull it up, the fact that he's not even at 50% of the ballots for the Hall of Fame, that's a little rough for not even being in Hall of Fame caliber or consideration. Now, will he get into the Hall of Fame? He may eventually. But yeah, 434 home runs. Let's see. 10-time Gold Glove winner, 5-time All Star. Led the league in home runs and RBIs one year. Now, I'm not saying that he is a surefire Hall of Famer and was an all time great. Well, I think he was one of the all time greats. But man, I think it's just a little rough that he's not even close to getting Hall of Fame consideration. Dale Murphy as well, two-time MVP, excuse me, of the National League, and these guys don't even get close at all to it. Even Omar Vizquel. So and it's just very confusing, the whole Hall of Fame deal. And I think you're just turning off a lot of supporters of the sport when there is not a good, consistent breakdown of kind of what you're looking for. Chelsea fired Frank Lampard from their team in the English Premier League, and now they have Thomas Thushel from PSG. They actually played their first game with the new manager yesterday in a 0-0 draw. I think it's a little rough but this is Chelsea though. They've had so many managers there. We've seen Conte there. We've seen Archuleta. We've seen obviously two stints of Jose Mourinho there with Chelsea. And I thought that Lampard, who may be top 3 or 4 best player in the history of that team, led him to multiple English Premier League championships and a Champions League title, all of that. And you're not even going to give him 2 years or 2 full seasons as manager of the team, especially when the team was in first place as early as December or last month, and you're just going to eliminate him immediately when they go through a tough spell. Now, are they underachieving? Possibly, but they still could finish in the top 4 in Europe and do some things in that regard. They made it through the transfer ban, and you brought in a lot of young players, including Christian Pulisic, the American, and you've seen the development of a good amount of those guys over his tenure there, and you just eliminate him when they go through a tough month of play. That's a little harsh. Now that's their man. That's their head, Roman, their owner. That's his approach. They go through managers like every year, year and a half. That's his approach to things. But we've seen patience with several franchises lead to success. Look at Manchester United with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who many people this time last year or even early this year would want to see fired from that team. And look where they are now. Now, yes, they just lost to Sheffield United, the worst team in the English Premier League, 2-1 yesterday as we're recording this. So that was their worst loss under his tenure. But still, all things considered, because United is in first place or was in first place, and then you look at Sheffield and they're in last place. So numbers wise, it's probably the worst loss. But still, you have to have patience with these teams, especially during the pandemic. Now, I don't think it's an excuse to just let things fly and let things go. But still, that even by their standards, I thought that firing was a little harsh in what they did. And that concludes today's show. Thanks for listening to our broadcast. As always, to follow everything that we're doing, head to the mothership, thesportsinquirer.net. You can also go to our social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search Sports Inquirer, that's all one word. And then finally, subscribe to us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Google Podcast under the Sports Inquirer. Until next time, good fight, good night, be safe.